Hello, project people. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. Remember to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast player and YouTube if you'd like to see some friendly faces. Dale, how are you, mate? Halfway through the year already. Can you believe it?
Halfway through the year, a brand new season as well, Val. Episode 76. I'm not too bad, by the way. Thanks for asking. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. We're closing in on the snow season, so hopefully I get out and I'll be able to take the kids for a ski soon.
Nice.
Mm.
Whoever thought of skiing in Australia? But anyway, there you go.
I know. Good. You got to do something in the cold. But yeah, I'm enjoying the lockdown actually a little bit. I'll be honest. It means I get to hang out with the kids during school holidays a bit more. So there are benefits in being locked down, ladies and gentlemen. You just got to find them. Can we pause? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No. Now let's get into it. We are joined today by Kristina Henkai to talk about how sustainably to implement 4D planning in your organization. Hi, Kristina. How are you?
Hello. Hi. How are you?
Very good. Very good. We are again this multinational podcast, so it couldn't get more exciting for us because we're in 3 separate locations, and I love having these international conversations. How about you, Dale?
I do. It's amazing. I think, Christina, you were saying before we'd record that you usually, with the 4D construction group, you're used to this, where I think you're saying the sun's setting for one person and it's rising for the other.
Yeah, we just do 4D all day, no matter where we are in the world.
Exactly.
Awesome.
It's nonstop. It's 24 hours, Val.
It is. It's matching tattoos straight after this podcast. That's what it is. That's what we're going to do. 4D. A shout out to the 4D guys anyway for bringing you into our podcast. Great guys and doing great things. So let's get into it. Should we start?
Why not? Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's kick it off. So Kristina, from your perspective, I mean, we'd love to hear a bit about your background before we get into it. We do have your bio anyway. But what does 4D mean to you? Because we've done this a few times with a few different guests, and it's not like it's been, just revealed yesterday. It's been around for a while. I know, and it's probably a loaded question. The 4D guys have a different name for 4D. But what's your take on it?
Yeah, you're so right. There's so many definitions out there, but there seems to be this one clinical mathematical definition, which I don't actually like, which is 3D plus time, right? That's like the cleanest, most mathematical way you can say it. But to me, it really understates the true value of what 4D can bring. And so my definition is that it's a visual planning process that allows you to analyze the correlation between changing time and space, right? And there's 3 key words there for me, which is process, correlation, and changing. And you'd think like maybe it was supposed to be space and time because 4D, but honestly, again, I think that sort of understates what we can do with this planning process, which is to really focus on how construction is so dynamic, right? Everything is constantly changing, and we need to know how one change affects another change. So that's the correlation part, correlation changing, and then having it be a process so it's not just a bunch of ad hoc things. So yeah, that's my definition, a visual planning process that analyzes the correlation between changing time and space.
Kristina, that's probably the best definition I think we've ever had in the history of this podcast, because I heard the same definition given to, I think it was 5D, where they said, "Oh, it's just BIM. It's basically time and cost. That's it."
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's a bit lame. I mean, how do you want people to be engaged with 4D and 5D if you give them these very ordinary names when it can do so much more? I actually default back to the fact I call it visual management. And because I want to include it in other things, or visual editing, and I want it to be part of an easier way of managing projects, I guess. But from your perspective, I mean, have you done, what's the biggest, in terms of your experience, what's the biggest implementation and how did that remain sustainable?
Right. So the biggest one was actually my first one, technically.
Nice.
Well, I guess it was like the first company. So a quick timeline of how I got introduced to 4D and where it led was this 12-month journey. And at the very beginning of it, I didn't even know what a model was. Okay, so we're starting like brand freaking fresh new to implementing it to the CEO. And that was like kind of the trajectory that I did over 12 months. But to your point, I also call it visual planning. Like I say, I'm a visual planning specialist. I'm not a 4D person. I'm a visual planning specialist. And the way it started was I was just walking during a reforecast, kind of dazed or whatever, and just wanted to do anything but the reforecast. So I'm like looking around, and I saw on one of the field engineers, they had a model on their screen. I didn't know what a model was. I asked. I thought that was pretty cool. It looked like what we were building. What is that, right? And then, long story short, we end up taking that model that was typically just for engineers and bringing it into our planning sessions in a very 2D way. I would say what model shots I needed, and then I would mark up what the 4-week look aheads were, and then we'd review that picture. So some people may call that like 2D, 4D, but to me, it's just visual planning, right? Like it's combining those things together. You notice there's no software in that little journey, but because of that, we had these amazing planning sessions where I had never seen before. People weren't blaming each other. Like, have you ever been to a scheduling update meeting where someone's not saying like it's his fault, whatever, and like he stole my crane, whatever it may be. And it was
my crane.
Well, it always happens.
Yeah, it does. No, you're right. Absolutely. 100% agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, it happened, the biggest implementation happened because of a spark of curiosity that grew because I found a person with a problem and tried to fix it with visual planning. And it's so simple in that sense. And then we went to corporate, started to document it, which is super key to making this sustainable, made an implementation guideline that goes through people, process, and tech, and then ultimately started to train people into how do you sell this vision and this process to upper management. Because at the end of the 12-month timeline that I'm talking about, we got the CEO to say, yes, keep going. Here's more money. I love this. This is how we need to do work. And when you have that upper level and lower level kind of coming together, that's really how you can make it sustainable. Focus on people, process, tech, and have upper and lower level engaged.
That's awesome. That is so good. Well, congrats. And that was your first, right? I mean, that was your first baby. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That is.
It was a terrible project in the beginning, which is a great learning ground.
Perfect. They are. Honestly, you get the harder the project, I think, the more skills you obtain, and especially if they're doing something kind of new edge or something different. Then and you're writing. I guess you're pioneering through all the various facets. And I like that you mentioned that you need that understanding of the implementation and the guidelines, but you also need that sponsorship from the top, and that's that buy-in of stakeholders, which is always really good. And we're emphasizing it again today. So. I don't know where we go, Kristina, from here. I mean, do we go and submit a petition that we would like to change the name of 4D to something a little bit more practical? Have you said that?
I have
right,
said
4D
that to
guys.
James. I said we need to take back this word and redefine it. That's what I told him.
Come on, James. Where's this petition? We're ready to sign. Dale, let's get this petition going.
we just have a word with James.
We'll just kick it off. We'll just kick it off. Let's do this petition. So after this podcast, we're going to get a petition. We're going to say, I don't even know where you'd send it to. This is the problem. I don't know where you'd send it to.
You don't need a petition.
Why you send it to everybody? See, that's one of the biggest.
A declaration, then. Is it a declaration?
It honestly is, and it's not. And 4D is not a product. It's not a tool. It's a process, and that's that's got to be one of the biggest culture shifts in it, because it's still very much presented as the video at the end or whatever the tangible may be, but it's not that. It's the picture that you should think of when you think of 4D is a group of people standing around something visual and planning out their work and considering all the elements of time and space. Like that's what the picture of 4D should be, not a pretty video.
And the exciting prospect is people aren't complaining or blaming. I mean, if that's what it takes to get a project to work together, everyone should be visual planning. I think with the 4D guys, I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, Dale, but I think they said it. They came up with a name as well. They wanted to call it model-based planning, which is pretty close, right? Yeah, it makes kind of sense. But what's your view on that?
So that's a good question. I think that traps you in the mindset of a model. And so like you don't want anyone to think, if I don't have a 3D model, I can't do visual planning. I can't do 4D. And so that's my biggest thing against MBS, model-based planning, because everyone just kind of thinks of it in that geometric representation kind of way. And that's ultimately where we want to go, right? But everything happens with an evolution. And when I first started, it was with a 2D plan and marking it up, right? So I think that we need to respect the way that people learn and have everyone go through these like micro evolutions so that they can actually adapt to that model-based side. Does that make sense? Did I just like rant? Sorry.
No, we all rant. But your rants make absolute sense, especially in the 4D space. I think you're right. I think language is, you got to be careful with language. It does have an impact of how people perceive things, particularly on projects, where there's options for them to listen or use the tools and the tool sets that you prescribe, or they can go off if it's too hard. You've seen this, right? When there's too much project resistance, they'll go off and make something of their own, largely out of necessity because they still need to deliver something. And I think sometimes maybe we're too prescriptive in projects, but there's another podcast, I guess, where we're telling them too much. We should just be outcome focused and say, look, if you want to get there via visual, if you want to write a whole bunch of documents, doesn't really matter. But I think you're right. I think we are also evolving into things wider than just BIM, which is another great terminology. BIM, 4D, digital engineering. And I'm just going to, this is one for me, and just because I'm curious, and then I'm going to hand it to Dale because he's probably got a whole bunch of questions. But what's BIM's role in digital engineering? Are they the same thing? Are they different? Why are they different? I'd love your take on that, Kristina.
Oh man, you just like asking all these like huge
sorry, I'm just opening up the can. You don't have to touch the can, you're just looking at
well, first of all, my schooling is in engineering, and when I hear the word engineering, I think it has to do, and maybe it's because I went to civil structural engineering, but I also keep coming back to the sustainability of whatever you're doing. And so engineering to me is really focused on making sure that you're designing something that works for the community, which is one part of sustainability, the people part. It makes sense from an efficiency point of view. It doesn't take like a crazy amount of resources. So here you can see where I'm leading to BIM. That's the economic point of view. And those are like just so important. And if you lose sight of trying to balance that trilogy, people, process, tech, everyone says it, but we're kind of like forgetting what it means. If we lose sight of that balance, then we can turn something into a monster. And so I think digital engineering is trying to bring it back to the balance, whereas BIM turned into a little bit of a monster. Not in a like, because it's used for, it's overblown in places where it shouldn't be, right? And it's just because there's this lack of guidance or learning or whatever it may be. I see some BIM plans that are just out of control. The level of detail that we're requiring for something that has minimal impact it's just totally not balanced. And so I think that might be the difference. Like at its core, they're doing the same things, but it's really like, where are they trying to head? Or maybe they're just trying to redefine BIM.
I think they are. I've heard all sorts of interesting topics and terminology like digital engineering, digital engineering plus, which included more BIM, where think digital engineering, from an outside looking in, because I'm not, well, I got an engineering background as well, but I think they see it as a design process rather than a full life asset management process, where what we're finding now, I think, is that BIM or 4D or asset management carries over beyond the end of the project finish date. And I'm going to bring Dale into the conversation because we've talked about the definition of a project. The smallest one is, it's a unique endeavor. I think Dale says it every other episode. And so if the project end date is no longer really the end date from a deliverable perspective, it probably is from a contractual deliverable perspective, but actually the through life product is still there, and there's a digital representation of that, because then you start talking about digital twins, and maybe we won't go there yet. But that probably struggle that for me, I struggle with understanding that properly, and how you deliver a quality product and maintain it. We do that anyway in handover, but usually it's the client's problem then. But to actually have something that's a digital representation of something in the real world is crazy. It's fantastic. It's exciting. But I think there's a lot of people that don't understand it. And so it does come back to what you're talking about. We kind of over complexify it. We gold plate it. We go down to levels that are ridiculous. I mean, you've seen this in general projects with schedules where we go down to this ridiculous level of reporting where no one's actually got a clue of what they're doing. They're all estimating and or sort of estimating, and
Flag.
it actually you question the value that it's adding to the project. So, hang on, guys, what are we trying to do here? I'm going to grab Dale in there and see what he thinks about this.
I love listening to this. I always love listening to conversations. I have the most privileged seat alongside Martin, I think, when you speak to our guests, Val. But I love the fact that you've called it visual planning. Pardon the pun, but you can see it when you say visual planning. You say you can see people standing around. And it reminded me of a podcast we spoke to Steve Moore last season, season 3, around where's this headed with all the technology. We spoke about sort of planning and scheduling innovation, and will there be holograms that everyone's standing around. And he kind of went, no, he thinks more it's going to be like sort of the 3D sort of glasses or HoloLens, I think he mentioned as well. So it's quite an interesting space because you can use different technology. But as you say, Kristina, it could just be a 2D plan that you sort of sitting around and extrapolating on and chatting around that. But you mentioned there that your schooling was in engineering, and just for those listeners, just to fill the gap, I'm interested to hear how you made the jump from engineering into the planning space. Is there a big, massive story behind that, or was it just a go ahead and do it?
I think I was meant for it. Like I think it was
Nice.
I think it was like this secret calling that you don't realize until like years later, like, you know what? These all led to that. I've always loved construction, and I've been told like sometimes I can be a little bit of like the bossier planner side, right? So there's like that starting from birth, it was meant to be. But it was really through engineering school. I always loved science, physics, math, like loved it, excelled at it. But the one thing I really enjoyed and took the most out of when I was in university was this group called Concrete Canoe. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but it's essentially like this whole design build competition where you build a canoe out of concrete and you have to actually make it usable. So it has to go through aesthetics. So it has to be pleasing, can't look like a lump of crap. It has to actually be able to float. There's multiple tests to check when you submerge it, will it come back up? When you actually race it, which you do, will it break? Will it shear? All these sort of things. So you have like real engineering in there, but the fun was somehow like combining this ragtag team of people and seeing that everyone, even though we're all in engineering in the same classes, I noticed strengths in each person, and it's how we found each of our like little places. And as a team, as a whole project team, it really came together, even though we all weren't really great at using the structural analysis tool, or we all weren't really good at aesthetics, or we all weren't really good at all of the estimates, right? We found a way to balance the team where the strengths were sort of brought up and the any weaknesses somebody had was a gap that was filled with somebody else. And so I kind of noticed that I loved that. Like that was the funnest thing. The classes were fine, right? Like school is school, like did well, A student, but that was like the most important thing that I did while at university was that team for 3-4 years. And then I got introduced via that experience to do project controls at Bechtel. And so that's where I got a lot of my planning project controls background. I started off in an engineering planning role where I could understand the engineer and what they were talking about. I could read drawings, all of that. But I could also communicate and speak to people from PM and engineering side and sort of like bridge that gap. So that's kind of how I fell into it, I guess, and it just kind of continued.
That's an awesome story. Did your canoe float?
Yeah.
Awesome.
We raced it. It was awesome. I loved it.
Wow. We should do something like that, Val. Like
What,
something
concrete
really
canoe?
crazy.
Yeah, it was a life-size canoe too. It wasn't small. Like it's like for real
Oh
people.
wow!
So
Did he put people in it? Is that part of the test? Would
yeah,
you put people
yeah.
in there?
There's a few races. You have 2 males in one race, 2 females in one race, and then 4 people. So 4 total people, whatever it may be, and you have to evaluate the point load distribution, all of that. So
Wow. And the
That's
oars,
great.
were the oars made out of concrete as well?
no, don't go
That'd be
crazy now.
tough.
No, it sounds like great fun that actually. But just listening to you there, I think you're just a natural born leader. Just bring it all together and, making sure looking at everyone's little sort of strengths, as you say. You never spoke about the weaknesses. You just said everyone has their own strengths. And that's a sign of a great leader as well. So that is awesome. So, okay. So you moved along into the control space, into the planning space. And I think one of the things that you mentioned there that I think planners, and maybe I won't call them planners, I'll call them schedulers, be a bit provocative, because there are a lot of people that are call themselves planners, but they're not actually real planners. They can't actually visualize what they're scheduling, right? See, I'll link that back to your visual planning. But until you can actually visualize the end result, all you're really doing is just putting a schedule together.
Yeah,
And
it's the math part of it all.
exactly.
Right?
And there's amazing software that can do those things today. You don't need someone to put that through. And that actually leads me into my next kind of question. How does AI, and I'm talking about true AI, not the bits we're trying to sort of dabble in right now in the construction or project management space, but true AI. Can true AI take visual planning, BIM, 4D, whatever you want to call it, and say, right, this is what I want to construct, put all of your inputs in, and you tell me exactly what you need to do. So almost replace the planner.
So here's the thing about the whole replace the person, replace the human conversation I take. And actually, I think Duncan World from Disney is who actually said this, but there are some innate human skills that we cannot replace with math, which is what a computer is, right? It's constantly thinking about the possibilities of what if, infinitely. But the planner, by true definition, should still be creative. The planner should still be curious and observant. And so even though we could have a true AI that can anticipate that it will rain because of the precipitation happening miles this way and how the wind speed is going, like we can really get into predicting a lot of things. But I still think there's an element of creativity that would be needed on site, especially when things don't go according to plan. Even though a computer is doing it, it can still have a slight deviation, a bug, right? Like who's going to be there to fix the bugs and to even understand what the bug is trying to say or what the root cause is. There could be an element there that is still very much human that we need to pay attention to. So I think, yes, future AI can do that, but there's just so many factors that need to be taken into account, that it just seems like we're a little slow right now in trying to get over that hurdle of true AI, like truly anticipating any sort of possibility. And one of the key reasons is it's just the machine that's learning, and it can't learn what it doesn't know. And humans need to tell it what it needs to learn, right? And it's just like that whole evolution process I'm talking about, where we need to feed the right ways, the possible ways, even the wrong ways, because those need to be highlighted. Hey, you're on the wrong path, right? So I believe we can get there, but it won't be a 100% replacement.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing your thoughts there, because it reminded me as well. I think felt was Anne Bamford that gave us the example where this lady called in to 911 and she said, "Hi, I'd like a pizza." And the caller said, "You've dialed 911." She said, "Yes, thank you. I'd like a pizza and I'd like it with pepperoni." I said, "Ma'am, you've dialed 911." And she said, "Yes, how long will it take?" And eventually he clicked and he said, "Ma'am, are you in trouble?" And she said, "Yes, thank you. That will do."
Yeah.
And I think the first thing she said when he answered the call was, "This is my address. I'd like a pizza." So immediately her address was on the call. And I think Anne was saying, you can't get AI to intuit that type of conversation. And that's a type of little nuance, I think, that you are referring to when it comes not just to a simple conversation like that, but hugely complex mega projects that are constructing hugely complex construction. So yeah, I completely take your point.
And that intuition is so valuable. And honestly, even if it was a scenario like, hey, you need to ask this person that, how long would it take the computer to run through its algorithm to figure out it's this way outlier situation to get to something you can feel?
Yeah.
Right. So it's all, sometimes I can get a little like soft about it, but a lot of planning is about feeling and just being sort of empathetic to what the scenarios are, and then understanding who are you talking to and catering your message so that it can serve them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No,
I'm getting there. I
absolutely.
love AI. I've got to talk about AI. It's so good. The problem with that example, this is the only, because I thought about it then, it's presupposing that you would need to call an emergency line if we had AI. So it's taking conventional methods and applying it to a future, a future technology. It probably wouldn't happen like that. You'd probably have AI in your house, like an Amazon Alexa with super smart sight, would see and probably understand through visual management. There we go. I got it back in there. That there's a problem. Something's not right. Behavior that's been elicited is not normal, and probably raise a flag and maybe get a patrol car to drive by. And so, yeah, it's an interesting one. But I think as well, AI is a dangerous term in terms of where we are today. We are nowhere near, from what I can see. And everyone I've asked, we got such a long platform, and I think it was Jeff Bezos that said, our generation probably won't benefit from real machine learning and real AI, but we've got a really important job as kind of data custodians to set up the infrastructure. And that's what we're doing, I think, with BIM and 4D and all this data management and consolidation into visual reporting and planning, is that we're getting it ready for. And that's going to take a long time. I look at construction projects in particular, Kristina, and I just say, we're nowhere near that. We are just nowhere near that. And it'll take some type of incentive, I think, or maybe a better construction or contract, or like you said, better buy-in and sponsorship through project owners, that they mandate this and they say, well, if we really, really want this, we're going to have to mandate it across the board, right? And you talk to the 4D guys and they'll say, well, we've been talking about this for 10 years. Kudos for consistency and effort, but it shouldn't take that long to get this involved. So from a sustainable perspective, I guess sustainability must mean also having enough capability. So how do we get people on I wouldn't call it the BIM journey, the visual planning journey? What's some things we can do to uplift the masses? Get some critical mass in terms of the number of people who understand this concept.
Yeah, that was what you're bringing up is the exact reason I started my company, which was the fact that I noticed one day that myself and a few dozen were the people in the world that were doing 4D. Like, that's absurd. That's ridiculous. That's unsustainable. And so I'm like, no way. We have to somehow accelerate this cloning process, right? And there's a lot of elements that go into how to do this. The person that has the information needs to share it, first of all. A lot of sort of mentality of someone's going to take my job, or, you know, whatever it may be, that stops people from sharing that. So that's one thing we could talk about at one point. But really, it's about just continually upskilling the people that are in the industry that have this potential but don't know that they have it, right? So there's like some secret sauce. Do you have industry, planning, and model? Do you have like an awareness of those 3 core competencies? And are you strong in another? But as well as thinking to the future, going into the education side of it and making people sort of really aware that these are things you need to start considering. These are things that are going to help the industry. These are careers, right? And sort of tackling it from multiple sides. I always take the people first process, because I'm like, okay, I know maybe that P6 jockey you were mentioning, Dale, like that person, she may actually understand things, but is just stuck in this world of F9, 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 right? So like maybe it's an opportunity thing, right? But that comes down to resources again. Are you creating an environment and a culture where it's actually okay for these people to try and learn new things, or okay to sort of step out of that F9 world? And then also, do we have the structure in place? So that's the process, right? Do we have a way, if someone raises their hand, yes, I want to, do they have a way to actually go about learning these things in a real fundamental way? And what I mean by that is not saying here's a software training, but here are the core fundamentals you need to consider when you're planning and when you're doing it visually, right? So like really focusing on those concepts, and then the technology will come, right? So I'm not a huge tech. I don't think the tech is the root cause. I think that that's an accelerator, right? And so when we focus on getting people out of university or even in high school, sort of understanding this is the process, that helps. When we're talking about the skill inside the organization getting upskilled, that's part of it. And then the documentation part is so important, but it needs to be done in a way that it works. So if you just are by yourself in a silo and you're like, well, these are all the things I did, and then you tuck it in your desktop, how is that going to help anybody, right? So you need to sort of figure out, these are the things that worked. These are the key things that helped our project, and we realize these are repeatable. Put that in a freaking contract. Offer that up in your bid. Say like, these are the things that we can do. Then more owners will start to see like, oh yeah, we should ask for this more. And also hit the owner. Like that's what I do. I work with the owners, I work with the contractor, and then I just work with some random person that wants to upskill themselves. Because I think it has to happen everywhere. And when you have it on paper, we're seeing more bids that say like requires 4D, requires visual planning, and it's getting more specific. That's forcing people to even wonder, how do we implement this? Who do we get to implement this? You know, they're asking those right questions. And it doesn't happen, you don't, and you need that for the masses, like you're saying, right? Like for the masses, you need that. For the dozens of people like myself and others in the 4D construction group, it's just pure grit and passion. Like, but that's not sustainable. That's personal. That's intimate. That's one-off. We need the structure, we need the process and the procedure, and not have it be something that is, I mean, make sure that it's something that actually works for that industry or that project. It's, you know what I mean? Like it has to actually be effective and not just some random procedure someone spent 50 hours on and tucked away and like no one even cares about it. Like that's, which comes back to the audience too. Sorry, I'm rambling. Go, take
No,
it.
no, no, no. It's good. We're listening. We're listening. We're listening. I'll comment before Dal gets jump back in there. I feel like, kind of like pipeline management, where, at the start of my career, I did a lot of manufacturing or production analytics, and it was great actually. Little's law, if anyone doesn't want to figure out throughput, but
Yeah.
I see schooling the same problem, where it really geared up for the industrial uh, kind of generation and revolution, but an evolution, but it didn't seem to do the same thing for the digital. And I'm wondering, when is school going to catch up? Because for this kind of introduction, it really needs to start early on. And we know kids are already being introduced to visual concepts and apps and endless streaming and visual kind of games on their iPads and etc. So it's not like it's a barrier to entry that they're not going to understand it. Probably later on they'll go to the how does the back end of this system work, and why is it important to use technology. But like you said, technology is not the barrier or the inhibitor to us learning these things. So I feel like, when they do conscription or there's a war, everyone gets behind it, they rally, they go to schools, they do talks. Like, maybe that's what's missing. Maybe we need more of us type people who are advocates and early adopters of these types of systems and tools and methodologies to really reach out. But before we do that, there needs to be a career flight path type thing from.
Yeah.
So I go, I love Kristina's talk. It was lovely. I want to do what she's doing. How do I do that? There's no mechanism, I don't think. Well, there might be, and I'll ask you the question, but how do they get from there then into the workforce? Not to just be an engineer, because largely, like project controls and project management, you fall into this category, and you usually come from some type of formal discipline like engineering. But
Hmm.
wouldn't it be great if you said you don't need to be an engineer to be a management or a visual planner? You don't need that. It's good to know, because you get the intricacies, but that should be part of the learning curve within visual management. So, what's your view on that?
Wow. That's I have a view on that for sure. My Another thing that happened to me in university was that I was mentoring and teaching actually. I was teaching kids that were behind the average, and I was creating lesson plans and finding very specific pain points to make sure that they gained that skill by the time the rest of the class did. And that teaching and that learning is something that I've continued to carry through. I think you're completely right in the fact that when you're in college or when you're in trade school or wherever you are, it's hard to see the possibility of where it could be, right? So one of the things I'm working on right now is actually making a game. It's called Digicon, Digital Construction, and it's meant to show. It's kind of like the funner version of Life. Like, have you played that game Life? Have you seen it? It's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
sort of a masochistic game because like you go through all these things and like whatever, but you go
Like
through a
Sims.
career path, right? And you have to make these decisions.
Mm,
Do you want to do something more hands-on? Do you want to do something more designy? What do you want to do? Do you like leading people? Do you not? And it kind of makes you go through this path and plots out where you could end up being. And it's things that people actually have gone through that I know through digital construction. So it's mapped based off of their actual routes, but you see some commons, like you said. A lot of people came from engineering. A lot of people go through trade school, become a foreman, superintendent, and then they get into things. So there's these common paths, and I think if we could bring light to the snake diagrams and the fact that there's these branches, but we're still all in this world of digital construction, um, then it would be a lot easier to see like what we could choose. So at the end of the game, you get to like print, these are the possible steps you should take for your career. And starting to emphasize more on skills than a silo or a category or a discipline, because that becomes more limiting. And I think the new generation is already in that mindset. Like they don't care for silos either. Like everybody wants to be a Renaissance woman and man, or at least majority, but have like a core competency in something. And so when we do these talks, which I know like Steve and Pedro, they're doing a lot of these, and DJ, when we do these talks, it needs to emphasize the skills and the fundamentals, and not so much just the job, but what you're doing in the job. Because the titles are going to change all the time, but we want them to have these certain skills that can be applied to either one. And understanding, like, you can go to school for computer science and be a developer and then be working on creating games for construction, right? Like, there's that route, which is another path. So I think it's, a combination of all that.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly comment. I think it can't be that hard to kind of get a survey together for people leaving school or preparing to leave school and enter into life and say, well, okay, it's probably difficult to know what's outside of your peripheral, what you don't know, like you said. And then you kind of have some questions that elicit roughly what you're passionate about. Because I think you're right. I think it's about matching what skills you'll need in the future workforce. Forget roles, forget group, kind of politics from a career perspective. But what are your passions? Because I find, particularly in our areas, those that are passionate in the profession are the most enjoyable to work with. They're the most engaged. They're the hardest working. They bring life to every subject they talk about. We need to get more people in there. So it's not about necessarily finding a bucket or a hole or a place for them to fill in, because it's not a production line. It is actually non-linear, and there's so many kind of stochastic branches you could go out to.
Yeah.
And so maybe there's a survey that kind of drills it down and goes, well, based on your preferentials and your passions and desires, even outside of your work life, like maybe you build concrete canoes or maybe you play guitar. We think these are pretty interesting areas to look at, not a role, but maybe the study criteria that might be involved in that. And I think even universities would have to play a role in this. This is the thing I think this is stopping it from happening a little bit, is the paywall in institutions and in universities, where they don't quite know how to monetize a non-standard role. So if you go in, you say, I'm a mechanical engineer, that's easy. Okay, well, we think you need these things to become a mechanical engineer. If you say, I want to be a visual planner across all sectors with no real specialization, this is around this fusion skills, or maybe the T-bar that we're talking about with Ann Banford and some of the other guys, Dale. What do they do then? It's very hard, and you're seeing this a little bit, I think, during COVID, where there's these micro credentials being issued, and people are hammering those, and they're getting all these small little certificates, and it's its own little bubble. I think that will probably be the way people want to study, and I think this is a huge risk and threat to universities. And I don't think universities should go away, because they're great institutions when they are ahead of the time. But I think for a while now they've just been behind the times. And so it's a really, we're not going to answer it on a podcast in an hour, but it's just a really interesting observation. And I think you're right. We just need to figure out how to get in there. And Dale, maybe we have to do more talks, or we need to figure out a way to move people back into this educational piece, because I think there's a big gap. And then those that have decided we found our passions, Kristina, like you and I and Dale, we need to go back and kind of represent. And
Pay
I don't
it
think probably
forward. Yeah.
pay it forward. Totally. Dale, I talk too much. It's your turn. Go.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. So you say, those that listen to Kristina's speech and get inspired and they want to do that. Well, Kristina did speak at the Project Control Summit on this very title and topic of this episode. But it obviously slightly different. It was in a webinar format, Kristina. And I think one of the issues with things like that is you're speaking to people that are already converted. We're talking about how to convert, those that aren't in the space yet. And so I think you are right. If schools and universities are the right place to go to spread the word, spread the love, so to speak, that's where we need to start. Because if you think back, how many people actually know what they want to go and study in university? They just choose something because maybe their friends are doing it, or that sounds interesting and I don't really know. But there's also an element of sales as well. How do you sell the profession? To say, actually, you know what, if you want to get involved in projects, this is a real angle, and this can be transforming cities, landscapes, people's lives, creating homes, creating businesses, infrastructure, the works. So it is an amazing place to be, and like you say, it's how do you expand that? It's quite an interesting one. But just touching back on your presentation, Kristina, was there either a key message or a particular query that came back to you in terms of feedback after you presented? I wonder if you could just share some of the experience of presenting at the summit.
Yeah, so one thing you mentioned was it's already people that were converted. I don't actually think that was the case.
Oh, really?
And which is quite interesting. I'm going to use the word interesting, that project controls seem to be one of the most difficult groups to convince to use 4D, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so it's not enough to just think it's cool or useful or whatever. There's still a healthy dose of apprehension on like, will this work for me, right? Is that going to work for my project, whatever it may be? And so I think a lot of people joining heard about what 4D was, but had their own preconceptions of what it meant. Maybe they had some bad experiences, like probably. And so what was interesting was getting some feedback from people. I got a lot of feedback where they're like, oh, I actually think this is something I can do. Or like, I used to think that was only for a modeler, but maybe I can do it, right? And so that was really interesting because when in my presentation, I focused on 3 different stories, 3 different people that I had encountered and coached throughout my career. And it comes back to the mastery and the core competencies of 4D. So the 3 groups were industry experience, modeling experience, and planning experience. And what I did is I went through each person. They were very strong in one of those 3, but had only an awareness or like kind of information level 2 on the other 2. And all 3 of them became experts at using 4D. And many people that reached out were like, those stories were what I needed to understand. Because, and it comes back to, I guess, representation, right? Like, is it possible? Is it a future? Can this actually work for me? Because a lot of 4D experts, especially in the UK, come from BIM. They don't come from planning. They don't come from project controls. And so there was this sort of not negativity, but I guess a barrier on like, maybe that's, I need a lot of modeling experience to do 4D kind of thing. And so that was a key takeaway, which was that you can come from all different types of backgrounds if you're focusing on the true message of what 4D should be doing for you. If you focus on pretty videos and highly dense and detailed models, then yeah, I don't think everyone can do it. But that's not the case. It's about making 4D easily consumable for all. And that includes how to construct it, how to actually consume it, how to add to it, right? And it's that whole cycle. So that's really what the presentation really did. It's like, how do you consider the right technology that works for what you need, the structures, developing a competency matrix, and that competency matrix fed into those 3, the trilogy that I mentioned. But yeah, that's kind of like the key, I would say. A lot about that structure.
No, that's awesome. Thanks for giving a quick insight into that. And so I take from what you're saying, the biggest sort of blocker was that awareness. I think the awareness that I can actually do this. I don't have to have a specific skill set. I can come in from different angles, because as soon as people actually understand it, it makes sense. It's a no-brainer. And then I go and I think, okay, so you did do it was a virtual conference, right?
Mm-hmm.
Across the globe, did you notice any particular patterns, perhaps from various areas of the globe where there was a bigger response, or maybe a less of a response, or maybe a bit more apprehension from certain countries to the others? Or was there nothing like that in terms of feedback?
I didn't really get anything from that specific presentation, but I have noticed that the competency level just generally is super high in the UK. And even in, Asia and the Middle East as well, that's starting to increase, but it's still pockets. And that's still the problem, is that you have like such a dense community, but everybody knows each other. It's like Groundhog Day. It's the same thing over and over again. And that is inherently a problem with sustainability if there's a core group of people that are the only ones that know how to do it. So that's why I focus a lot on just putting myself out of work, like for real though, not just as a pitch, because some people are like, oh yeah, we'll be there for a week and then we'll put ourselves out and whatever. No, for real. Like I try to do every single thing that I know and give it to somebody else so that they, again, can pay it forward to someone else. And because if we continue that cloning process and we standardize it at the root, which is at like high school, then it becomes just the way we do work. And that's my goal, is to make 4D just part of the process, not like someone saying, you know what we should do? A Gantt chart. Like that shouldn't be the thought. It should be, let's do 4D, like duh.
Yeah.
And then you know what we should do? A hologram. Like those should be the ahas. So we got to get over that hump, and a lot of it has to do with just spreading that information in an easy way. And that's why I still allow PowerPoint, even Power BI sometimes I use for 4D, like because it's all about tagging, right? Making it consumable for whoever we're talking to, Excel all the way to using Alice or whatever the extremities are, and making it every single level. Hands down.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And just sticking with webinars for a second, last year, I know you're involved with the 4D construction group.
Yeah.
There was a webinar, a free one. Is that happening again this year?
Yes, we are planning that. Let's see, it's about 2 months away. It's September 28th, I believe. It's going to be 2 days. And the thing I like about that conference is 28th and 29th, is that we also understand people have certain attention spans. And so every presentation is only about 15 minutes long. And it comes back to like micro skills and the learning process. And we just sort of hit you with the story, with the concept and all that sort of stuff, and you can move on to the next. So it's very, again, easily consumable and visual of a conference. So really excited for that.
No, it is exciting. So last year I didn't manage to get through, or I think it was 3 days. I think last year
it was 4 days.
It was 4 days. Yeah.
Yeah, 4 days.
I couldn't get on to every day, 24 hours a day, but I managed to watch some of them, and I was blown away by the presenters on there. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. Send us the link. We'll put on the podcast show notes for those listeners as well that want to, get involved. But I think it's an amazing thing that you guys put on last year, and I think this year is going to be even more exciting from what I'm hearing from you. So
yeah, this year's focused more on like the maturity. Last year was kind of like introduction,
yeah,
but this year will be the maturity and how do you go through various steps of that for your implementation.
Awesome. So I just want to shift gears slightly. You spoke about at the summit, you sort of told real life stories on 3 different angles.
Yeah.
Can we take 4D planning and sustainability, and do you have a real life example? I mean, you don't have to name names of companies or individuals where you've gone in, implemented the full skill set and tool set and the full environment, and it's still reaping benefits today, and what impact that had on that specific organization?
I can't mention names or projects. See, that's another thing I hate about this all though, is, let's hear a case study, whatever. And they're like, oh, we can't share. Honestly, that's a huge roadblock value. You're trying to figure out like what's the biggest barriers and stuff. That's a huge barrier, is the lack of just sharing openly the wins. Manufacturing companies do this. Construction don't, like for some reason. But I can't mention the names, unfortunately. But see, how do I word this without
Called Project X.
So Project X, they focused, and this comes back full circle to the evolutionary steps. They focused on a single discipline. Okay. They didn't say, hey, let's just 4D this whole world. They focused on one single discipline. The discipline happened to be spread across the entire project, and it was critical, right? So it was the most critical discipline. And that's one they focused on. And they did it for that entire project. What they noticed is that team was just doing so well. Like the foremans were using it. It was just a part of the everyday process to get into the room and hash things out quickly, not to go forward unless there was an issue. I mean, if there was an issue. And the evolutionary part of it is that we started to notice we need to get steel involved. Okay, duh, it sits on, pipe. Pipe sits on steel. And then we're like, okay, well, we need steel, then we need concrete. And so it kind of like kept driving down, but it wasn't just thrown at the project. It was slowly accepted by it. And when we did it that way, it was championed by the trades, championed by construction, not by some BIM group or some project controls group or whoever the group is, whatever enemy you want to pick, which is a whole nother thing.
Yes.
But it was championed by people that really saw that it was solving their problems. And when we kept sort of taking those steps and adding more, adding logistics, adding safety, creating things like a safe square footage parameter, right? So it's more than just the visual, it's also like an intelligent visual. So understanding that this is a boundary point, and when we're doing a certain type of work, we need this much space. Like it's starting to get more and more intelligent, but it has to be done in those sort of step approaches. So everyone's sort of coming along together on board. And that team, some of those core people, after that project was a success, they got separated. Most of them got separated, but they were trying to like make little catalysts in those other projects, right? So yeah, it was like the ultimate at this one project, but then when they went three ways, if you can still maintain that catalyst, then it continues again to branch and branch. And so that's how it becomes the message. Like, I guess I don't want to say crusaders, but like we're kind of like crusaders, like spreading that message through actual things that work and not just talking though, because you got to see it to believe it. You got to do it to learn it, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm writing notes as we talk because I'll probably have to come back and listen to this again, and maybe even your presentation if anyone hasn't seen it. But I like the idea of digital construction. I think it's a nice way of keeping it high level, but in kind of infers that nothing's really changed. I think some of these titles and terms and these departments are, like you said, a barrier to entry, and they create more us and them, and it's just more friction that you have to deal with on a regular basis, which is exhausting for the people on projects. Those that are on projects right now, and you're upset with project controls, or project controls is upset with engineering, or whatever it is. Stop, cut it out. We're going to visual planning.
Yeah.
Get on board. Yeah. And I think the other thing I know, I speak to a lot of various different people at various different stages of their career. One of the things is as well accessibility to just the basic steps into a particular craft. So, if you're learning how to, I don't know, blow glass, there's a few things you need to learn first before you hurt yourself, which is great. You mentioned safety. What is, from your perspective, and this is a question because I'm very curious myself, is that, there are steps and guidelines out there, but how would you go about setting up a project from scratch with, whether it's, this 4D approach? Would you start with data inputs, cleaning that up, getting buy-in, classifying, linking to the schedule? Is something like that, or is it a little bit more complex and obscure?
Depends how much control I can have, because the very, very first thing I do would be like a strengths finder for the team and understand where each of these people's strengths are and best positioned. Because even though I have someone that's called a project scheduler, are they the person I want running my planning meetings that are supposed to be interactive and engaging, right? So that's going to matter. Again, technology is going to fall short unless we actually have it be meaningful. And then once I tackle, how I think everyone should be placed, then it would be about establishing a common project language. And I even think that 4D can be a project language, because I'll give you an example. We're all speaking English, but we could definitely say a word that we don't understand. So I was talking to somebody in the UK, and he's like, well, just move that cherry picker over there. And I was like, what's a cherry picker? It's like, I'm just imagining some dude like picking cherries.
Elevator platform, right? Yeah.
Right. You called it an elevated platform. I call it a man lift. Why do I call it a man lift? I don't know. But
trained,
why do
yeah.
you call it a cherry picker?
I
So
have no
like,
idea.
it's the same language, but we're still
Mm.
talking past each other. We can still be confused. Whereas establishing 4D and a common visual, a common vision and strategy where everyone's involved is a core concept to a project language. And then saying like, when we talk about this thing, this is what we're going to call it, because that will persist throughout the project, whether it come down to the coding, to the naming, but also just generally the references. Like, we're not going to get confused. And starting that off in the beginning is really helpful. And yes, we start out the requirements document for technology, but what feeds those requirement documents and the project setup, like you're mentioning, is where do we want to be at the end? What are we trying to get at the end? And so you constantly need to think about the end state and end user. Whatever the heck you're doing, you should know what that answer is. Like, so
Yeah.
that's kind of how I would start it off. And it would be a little uncomfortable, I think, for some people, because they're like, well, what do you mean? How are we supposed to know these things? But I think it asks the right questions at the right time. And then the details will come as we're going, as long as we have that sort of, mindset.
Yeah. And does it mean that just, well, yeah, it does to a degree. And then the technical bit for that would be, do you bring the 3D model to the plan, or do you bring the plan to the 3D model? How do you bridge those two? Because sometimes it's a little bit like oil and water.
Yeah.
They talk, like you said, they're talking past each other sometimes.
Yeah. I don't ever want them to be oil and water, and I don't think they should be. The only reason they are sometimes is just I'll save that. The only reason they are is because we are willfully allowing that to be the case. How about that?
Great.
It's not, hold on, my screen's on there. It's not something that needs to be oil and water. And so when creating the schedule, creating the model, that's why I mentioned what is that end state, because one of those answers are sometimes we want to be able to have a one-to-one relationship for everything that is critical, whatever critical is. Or we want to make sure that we can see all of the bulks and the rates and installation and anticipate it, but not actually have to spend all this time modeling it, right? Like, that could be one of their end states. And that drives the decision on how to create that model and how to create that schedule. And what I'm actually coaching a group right now, and I'm working with the designers and teaching them about scheduling, just enough to understand what it is they're doing, what impact they're having. And then likewise, the schedulers about design. I was like, you can't schedule like this because it will never be designed this way. And then otherwise, to the planner about construction, like, you can't plan like this because they're never going to actually use it because no one builds that way, right? And so it comes back to that trilogy again of like experience and modeling and planning. You can be really strong in one, and that'll probably be your forever core, but there needs to be an awareness on each. So I say they start together. And that's why I first answered, it depends on how much control I have. Because if it's like a baby project, lots of control. If it's a rescue project, then it's usually evaluating both and applying. The schedule usually has a lot more detail than the model, when you consider the schedule, including like the stuff that the superintendent has in his back pocket, plus the actual client schedule, which I hate that they're different. That's a whole nother topic as well.
Yeah.
But
yeah, definitely.
kind of finding the common, and then you have to usually add something to both when you're coming in as a rescue project. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. No, it is a difficult one, and I agree. It shouldn't be two different things. We just probably need to sit it out, and that awareness curve as well from a maturity perspective is something that these things like the podcast, paying it forward, like you said, getting in there and representing at schools and early on in life, so there's career prospects for people to get in early, because it won't be role specific. It'll be skill specific, and I think there's an idea of embedding those skills in each department as well. Like what you said before, you want the tradies to own it. You want the I guess the people that are accountable and responsible to own that part of the plan or that part of the visual dashboard or whatever it's going to be, to take ownership. Because when people have control, they will take responsibility. If you control it for them, they'll be like, well, this is your project now. Screw you guys. It's nothing. If it goes wrong, it's not my problem, because now you're saying it's yours. So, no, thank you, Kristina. Dale, over to you.
Thanks, Val. Yeah. I was just thinking there, listening in, if it is oil and water, then that's the first sign that something's wrong, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah. It was our
rescue project. Yeah.
And it's probably a bad project manager. No offense, project manager, but like it's a bad project manager because the senior management, the senior leadership, maybe not even senior leadership, but project leadership, regardless of level, needs to set that tone, right? And like, so if you allow there to be this weird fight between engineering and construction all the time, or whatever it may be, like you're just perpetuating it, and it doesn't actually have to be that way. I mean, one of the companies I love the most is actually DPR, because they have so many little loving superintendent groups that like you wouldn't think would get along, but they do. And it's because that is how they set it up from ground one, right? It's ground zero. Like they just start off like, this is how we treat each other. This is how we're going to get along. This is how we work. And everyone still cusses and yells or whatever.
of course,
but it's productive. It's like a
Yes.
family, right?
Yeah.
We all fight, but productively.
Yeah, constructive discourse is healthy.
Yes.
So, you
And
need
that
a
keeps
healthy
it fun
tension.
too, quite
Exactly.
honestly.
Yeah, for sure. I agree.
But no, Kristina Henkai, I love your passion. I love it that you're all about paying it forward as well. We could literally talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but we do have a limited time. So we'll have you back in the future to discuss another topic. And I also love that you've provided us another triangle. We love triangles on the Project Shadow podcast. We haven't had a
It's my
triangle.
favorite shape.
That's mine too. There we go.
But we
Besties
haven't,
now.
we haven't had a triangle for a while. So it's been amazing. And we went down quite a few rabbit holes there. So listeners, be sure to go back, rewind, listen again. But this does bring us to a very special part of the podcast, Kristina. It is our feature. And we have had in the background Mr. Martin Carriston sort of just listening in, preparing himself to take you through your paces for Defend the Indefensible.
Okay.
Thanks, Dale. Thanks, Kristina. I really enjoyed that. Again, and really passionate a summary of 4D planning. It was really interesting. As Dale said, we have a guest feature on the show called Defend the Indefensible. It's where we ask our guests to defend a ridiculous statement for 30 seconds. It's inspired by some of the ridiculous comments we've all heard over the years, and I'm sure you've had a fair share of these over yours, given the subject. So if you're willing, if you're keen, we can make a start.
Okay. I hope I do okay.
Okay, Kristina, you have 30 seconds to defend the following statement. As a project manager, we don't need marketing tools like 4D planning if the experts just delivered on what they said they would do. A simple Gantt chart would suffice. Discuss.
Okay, first of all, I would have to take a breath. And then second, say, just because, I would probably say, how do you know what they're actually executing is in line with your expectations? Are you actually communicating exactly what you need, even though it's in text, even though it's in language? Does everybody understand what it is you're trying to deliver? So you say deliver within expectations. Well, don't everybody have a different interpretation? And so I would probably just keep nailing them on that.
Very good. Cheers. Thanks a lot. I could feel the pain there. It was.
Oh, you brought up like so many faces popped up in my mind.
few project directors.
Yeah,
come out with that.
It's exactly that. It's telling somebody like a different point of view and explaining like, hey, things get lost in translation no matter what. Like no matter what. So.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. Before you go, just one more thing. We have a quick pop quiz where we treat all our guests 5 quick fire questions all about yourself. So if you're keen, we can make a start.
Let's do it.
Okay, question 1. Would you rather spend your day with people or technology?
People, but specific people.
Good answer. Like that. What's more important, time, cost, or quality?
Quality. Quality affects lives.
Very good. Okay, I completely agree. What's the best book you've been gifted?
Oh, what is it called? So my good friend Charlie Dunn has really gotten me into storytelling for like a long time, and it's called The Storyteller's Secrets. Absolutely love that book. It's a book of stories, actually, but they're categorized, and I use that in everything I do. Plus, we're probably going to do an event that's called like Story Learning in Construction that I created based off of that book. So that's the book. Totally.
Oh wow! You can see 3 pens going writing that down there.
Done. Yeah.
Thanks. We'll definitely look that up. Number 4. What's the biggest mistake you've made on a project?
Not following my gut. I knew something seemed wrong, but I was the junior planner and she was the lead planner, and she essentially told me to shut up and just do what she said. So I did, because I was so new and just didn't know. And then 2 weeks later, we both got in trouble because that schedule was crap. And I knew it was crap because I wasn't listening to the superintendent. So I never make that mistake again. I'm constantly talking to the people doing the work, performing the work, and translating what they're doing into whatever gibberish I need to do, a Gantt chart, a text. So that.
Great, good advice. Last one. What profession other than your own would you like to have attempted?
A teacher.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You definitely see the education coming through there.
I think actually my 15-year goal is probably not going to be in construction. I think it'll be in education, doing some of the things that Val talked about, which is restructuring the way that we teach our youth. So that.
Great.
Well done.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Kristina. Back to you, Dan.
Thank you, Kristina. That was amazing. Maybe we should tie you up with Anne Bamford. She's also huge in education and fusion skills in London, at the City of London. So
yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, we'll hook you up. But just before we go, any final thoughts you want to leave the listeners with, Kristina?
Final thoughts. Well, I guess you know what? Maybe it's not related, but it's on my mind and I can't get it out. There's this Buddhist quote I really love. My family's Buddhist and so am I. And it's truth without compassion is cruelty. And I think we can take that into a lot of what we do. There is fact in a lot of what we do, but without understanding points of view, how this impacts another person, then we're just kind of being mean. And unless you're being mean for fun, it's not good. So yeah, maybe that.
Awesome. Very, very wise words and thoughts to leave the listeners with. I don't even want to go to Val, but I will. Val, final thoughts.
Oh, you don't even want to go to me.
No, after what Kristina said, how can how can you top that?
I know. You can't top that. I'm not going to try. But I do thank Kristina, especially on our first episode for season 4, and also going into the education area and really paying it forward. As you said, it's fantastic to see it, and we will definitely organize that petition on a name-changing event. Maybe it's a big ceremony or something. But thanks for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Congratulations on 4 seasons too. That's amazing. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me, guys. It's been really fun.
It has indeed. So, folks, that's all the time we have. But remember to hit subscribe before you go. A massive thank you to our guest, Kristina Henkai, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me, Val, and Martin, it's bye for now.